Hello and welcome. My name's Rob Pulham and I'm here today on behalf of the Gauge Guild to do a short discussion on the basics of plastikard modelling. Most of my plastikard modelling, in fact virtually all of it, all relates to the making a rolling stock, but all the sort of techniques and things, the tools that I use are all just as easily used for making buildings or any other things that people might want to make from plastikard. I'm going to start off with a few of the basic tools that I use, and then move along onto some of the slightly more exotic tools that I've gathered over the years that I've been modelling. And then some sort of hints and tips on the basics of plastikard modelling. Start with the very basic things. I use a couple of cheapo propelling pencils with 1/2 mm lead, several different sizes of ruler. Got a short one I use mostly, quite a long one for scoring and cutting longer lengths, and I've also got one of these which I model in 7mm to the foot as the Gauge Guild is sort of focused on. And this is a scale rule that allows me to take a given measurement and scale it off without having to necessarily rescale the drawing, etc. So if you know the size of a door is 2'6" by 6'6", you can very easily draw a door using the feet and inches on the scale, if you've never used a scale ruler before. Moving on from there, lots of things for cutting styrene. I basically use two types of Swan Morton scalpel. The blades are a 10A and a 10. You can get umpteen different blades for Swan Morton scalpels. I've never needed to use any more than those two. I also have the trusty Stanley knife just for things that are a bit more robust. Another thing that I found really useful are these. These are squares but they're flat. I've got a couple of 3-inch ones and a 4-inch one, and they're really good for not only marking out, but if you try to get your little bits and pieces to be square onto each other or what have you, they're really useful, because these ones you can fit down inside vehicles to make sure that the sides are square just by using cheapo clamps, which brings me on to these. These are just really cheap plastic clamps that you get from pound shop for half a dozen or so. I've got a couple of different sizes of these, and I use them for clamping bits of plastic together when I'm gluing it. I use them for holding squares in place if I'm trying to make things vertical. For how little they cost, they're really useful bits of kit, and you can get them at most sort of pound type shops, and the B&M bargains, the Wilcos, the Boys of this world. From a similar sort of shop, I've also got quite a selection of the diamond nail files that ladies use. This one's particularly useful. I have a couple of these, and I got these on the cosmetics counter at Boys, 95p I think it was. I also use wooden Emery boards, again the type that the ladies use, and one of the great things about these is that, as you'll notice with this one, I've chopped it down a bit to fit in a slot. You can just, with the aid of a scalpel or your Stanley knife, you can just create whatever shape you want. Cheap as chips, 60p for a pack of God knows how many. So you can make sort of very precise files for doing a specific job should you need to. From there, moving on with my little armoury, I've got a selection of pin vices which are not only good for gripping small drills, but they're also really good for gripping pieces of tube and rod. So if you want to cut a precise length of plastic rod, all you do is grip it in your pin vise, measure off the length that you want, and then it's really easy just to pop your scalpel blade to the edge of there, just roll it round a few times and snap, and you get a precise length of rod cut very easily, or tube, without it being, if you're like me, I've tried cutting pieces of tube and rod and just try to slice it through in one go, and it always winds up coming out at an angle, and I think that's to do with the fact that there's the pitch on the blade where it's been sharpened. So the use of a pin vise to roll it round makes it very, very easy. You can, of course, if you're just doing just really short lengths, just place it on your cutting mat and roll it, and it'll cut off a nice precise length as well. I just find it a little bit easier to use the pin vise. I've also got an Archimedes type pin vise, which is good for really fine drills, and you can use it quite precisely for drilling, and it just sort of pops backwards and forwards. I have a second one of these that's actually got a return spring on it, but I've not got it to hand at the minute. The next thing that I use lots of, and this is just a selection of the pairs of tweezers that I've gathered over time, especially for putting really small parts on. What you do need is some quite rigid tweezers. I've got several other pairs of tweezers, but they're actually really too flexible for, you get hold of something and by the time that you've sort of got hold of it, it's sprung out of the way because they're very flexible at the ends. So you're better off with some that they've got a bit more stiffness about them, so that you can use them to grip things. Not really necessary, but another tool that I find really useful, particularly for making holes. Once you've drilled a hole, if you want to make a hole a bit bigger, is one of these sort of tapered brooches. Really good for enlarging holes in styrene, particularly if it's thicker styrene. You can just keep working your way through it. And this is a cheap and cheerful one that I'm not even sure where I got it from, but they're not. You can buy them for very little money off these cheap tool stalls or markets and things like that. And another couple of cutting devices. You'll have heard people talk about scrawkers potentially. This is what's known as an alpha cutter, but Tamiya make a very similar one, and you can get several different types of this. They sell them on eBay for window fitting, but if you just do a search for alpha cutter, I think I paid about £8 for this one, and it's got some spare blades in it. I've never needed to change the blade, and not only do I cut styrene with this, I also cut sheets of brass with it, just by scoring and snapping. The beauty about cutting sheets of styrene with this blade as opposed to a scalpel blade is that this actually removes a sliver of plastic, whereas your scalpel blade or your Stanley knife blade, ultimately all it does is it forces the plastic aside and creates a little shoulder. So depending on what you're doing, you might find that you've got to sand off the shoulder before you start sticking other bits to it, otherwise your measurements are not quite as smooth as what you thought they'd be. As an example, I work quite a lot with Plastikard, and I tend to, because I'm making vehicles, I tend to laminate 3 layers of thin Plastikard rather than using a single layer of thick stuff. And this is because the laminated Plastikard is much stiffer than the a single sheet. But the thing to remember when laminating Plastikard is that you need to have an odd number of laminations, so either 3 or 5, and this reduces the tendency to warp. Just to give another little example, these are W irons that I've made, and they are really quite rigid, and they're a central layer of 1/2 mil styrene with a layer of 0.25 mil styrene either side of it, and they work quite adequately in a similar way to the Parkside type W irons, and they are really quite rigid. I've got several vehicles that run quite happily with them, and I'll be doing that on all my future vehicles that require it, that don't have W irons, you know, if I haven't got any cast ones or things like that. To laminate Plastikard, I layer each, rub off all the burrs, which there's still some on that side that I can feel, so just a slight rub with my nail file, just gets rid of it. And then what I have is a sheet of glass that's got 2 pieces of aluminium strip. These particular sheets of glass are cupboard shelves from B&Q, and the aluminium strip was also bought at B&Q. It's stuck to the glass just with normal PVA. I have these just for demo purposes because I demo at shows, but what I use normally is I've got a couple of fridge shelves, redundant fridge shelves, so if ever you're throwing a fridge away, just keep the glass shelves. Stick a piece of aluminium strip on the bottom, and you've really got the basis for somewhere to glue your laminations. Place a piece on, paint it all over with glue, place your next piece on, making sure that they are square up, because this one doesn't seem to want to sit square. And again, place your third one on, place your next piece of glass on top, and then this is where your little plastic clamps come in. Clamp those together and leave overnight to dry. Now, next question to answer is glue. Because I work with quite thin styrene, the traditional, although I do use plastic weld, and I do use mech, which one I can get it out. This is a mech pack bottle, but it's actually got some mech that I bought a litre of from eBay, because I just find it much cheaper to buy it by the litre. I do use those occasionally if there's something that's quite thick and I'm struggling with. But what I tend to use most of all, again it's in a little ex-plastic weld bottle, is D-limonene. Again, you can get this from the traditional hobby suppliers like Hobby Holidays, Eileen, Squires, but again I buy it by the litre from eBay, which works out much cheaper. It's a much milder solvent than your plastic welds and your mech, and what I find particularly with either plastic weld and mech, when I'm using 10th house styrene, which I use quite a lot of for detailing, it's very thin, it has a bit of a tendency to melt it. Whereas D-limonene doesn't. It's quite mild. It smells very nice. It smells of oranges, so it doesn't have that acrid sort of spirit smell that you get with the likes of plastic weld and mech. But it's also got a bit more working time, so you can put it on, you can adjust it, unlike mech that just sort of instantly grabs. But on the flip side of that, it takes a lot longer to dry, so hence the leave it overnight. So you need to sort of plan out what you're doing make your parts up. You can, under your sheets of glass, you can put multiple pieces. Once you've done your first piece, you can slide that over and put another piece in the corner and slide it over. So you've just got to sort of plan out a bit what you're doing before you do it, so that you're not sort of waiting for everything. But as with lots of things that we do in modelling, it's do a bit of work, wait for your glue to dry, wait for your paint to dry, or that type of thing. Getting on to some of the sort of slightly more exotic but also very useful bits of kit, I do make use of this, and this is it's a circle cutter. Again, I bought it from the stationery department of one of these pound type shops, but really useful for cutting circular discs. It's got a blade on there, and you just pop it on, and I think I paid £1.50 for it. I've got a couple of these, and I've also got one of these, which is really useful for cutting multiple lengths of, if you want to, say for example, you wanted to make a ladder out of styrene and you wanted to cut all the rungs all the same length. This allows you to cut multiple pieces of the same length by setting these side pieces. You can cut at angles. You've just got to think about how your angle works, because it all works a bit in reverse to how you'd expect it to work. But you can just put your ruler on, measure, pop the blade down, put your ruler on, measure from the blade to get the exact length, and you can just then use it as a mini guillotine to cut multiple lengths. I've had this for probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years or more, and I'm only on the second blade. So although you can change the blade, and the single-sided razor type blades that again you can get from eBay, they do last a long time, and to be fair, while you can use these things, these are the little guides, also these things work just as well, and you can put them on if you want to sort of cut something that's a bit more robust, because it doesn't have the same tendency to move. These, I think I paid about £40 for this, so it's not the cheapest sort of item, but it's certainly, for me, it's earned its money. And I believe you can get spare cutting mats for it. Again, I've not really needed to buy a spare cutting mat for it. Another, particularly for people who are building buildings, but I use it for building vans and things, is this little device. It's called a Kaufman clamp, and it's brilliant for sticking pieces together to create corners. So if you were wanting to glue a building together, or a van, or I'm doing this very sort of quickly and very crudely, but if you take time, you can set your joint up quite securely and very square, and then you can just paint down the inside with the adhesive, and again leave it to set. I bought this one from a company called Finney & Smith, but who I believe are no longer in business. But I'm sure there'll still be suppliers out there, because I can't imagine that they don't make them anymore. I also make extensive use of, and this is just a very small sort of selection of my stock of plastic. I use Plastruct in various sections. These are sort of rectangular sections. I've got different types of tube, and evergreen for rod, and again different types of sections. You can get some very precise pieces, and if they are the pieces if the bits that suit what you want, they're brilliant. Obviously it saves a lot of cutting. There's no point cutting great big chunks of styrene if you can already buy some that are the right shape, unless you want thousands of them or something like that, and it works out too expensive, because they're not the cheapest things in the world to buy. In fairness, they're about sort of a £5 a packet, or possibly slightly more. Once you've laminated your pieces, they come out looking like that. Now these particular pieces are for a North British Railway yeast van, I believe. The beauty about laminations is that you can make louvers that actually work. If you look at that and then I tilt it very slowly that way, you should be able to see through it. This is because on the outer layer I put the holes, and then on the next layer I moved them up 0.5 millimetre, and then on the final layer I moved them up another 0.5 millimetre, which then allows you to sort of have something that looks flat on the front, but then, like I say, as you tilt it, it actually gives you a proper lamination. This particular piece, I probably laminated them about 2 years ago, and I've been using them on my demo stand, never actually getting round to assembling it. That's the ends of the van. And this is yet another van that I made quite some time ago. It's literally just been held together like that. It's had no bracing whatsoever, and because it's not really fastened to a base or anything, there is an ever so slight sort of bit of movement there, but again it's been like that for a couple of years, and those are the doors for it. Ultimately my plan is that I'm going to make it so that the doors actually slide open, hence the detail on the inside. I just haven't got that far yet. With a lot of projects in styrene, you can sort of knock things up fairly quickly, but if other things sort of grab your attention, then it's not a big expense to pop on one side. This is the body of a North British Railway CCT. You may wonder, do I model the North British Railway? And the answer is no, I model the LNER, but I started reading the Tatlow volume of LNER models, and I just happened to pick up the Scottish volume first, and work my way through quite a few of the drawings in there. This is really quite rigid, and again it's made out of three layers of 20 thou or 0.5 mil styrene, with bracing pieces down it made out of the same material, and this again has been put together like this for probably 2 or 3 years, and it's quite significant. So it's a very rigid way of making your styrene pieces. Now I know that there are other people who prefer to use thicker material and then use triangular braces in the corners to hold them together, but I'm sort of just passing on, you know, what I found works for me. I'd like to sort of end this session because I've got a sort of a limited amount of time, but I'm just sort of showing you a few of the things that I've actually made from styrene. This is a former London North Western Railway line wagon. Every bit of it, apart from the buffers, the wheels, and the axle boxes and brake gear and things, are all made from scratch using styrene. That's the very first vehicle that I made that I scratch built in styrene. Many of you will know me from my demos at Doncaster and Gildex and places like that, for demonstrating my silhouette cutter, which I use these days to create a lot of the parts that I use for scratch building. This was entirely cut freehand, everything. I made it before I got a silhouette cutter, so I'm quite pleased with that. Just to sort of demonstrate some of the things that you can do with a silhouette cutter. Again, this is almost entirely built out of styrene. The only bits that are not built out of styrene, scratch built, are the axle boxes, the springs and the brake levers and the V-hangers and the brakes themselves. Everything else, all the saw bar detail, the saw bars, the tank, even the tube at the top that the lid fits on, all the pipe work underneath, the underframe, it's all made from styrene. All bits of tube and rod and sheet. Although this demo isn't specifically about the silhouette cutter by any means, I don't know if you can see, but on the top there, all the rivets, if you can pick them out in the light, are all cut by the silhouette cutter. On this model, the little container, which is an A container, again, all the bodywork. On this one, all the axle boxes, the springs, sorry, not the axle boxes, the W-irons, the springs, the spring hangers, everything apart from the buffers and the wheels have been made, and I believe the brakes on this one are Parkside, but I have made my own brakes as well using the silhouette cutter. So you're only limited by your imagination when using styrene, and this is one that I've literally finished in the last week. This is an North Eastern Railway implement wagon, again completely scratch built in styrene. The only bits that are bought in are the buffers. The axle boxes came from spares from the Jim McGowan kit, the wheels. The brake lever and the lever guard are just made from strips of brass that I bent up and drilled holes in. So I'm really quite pleased with that. It's turned out quite nicely. It's certainly slightly different to the kit that Jim produces, but certainly comparable, and I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't sort of said, yeah, this is made out of styrene, that most people won't guess that it is. Well, thank you very much for dropping by and watching. I hope it's been of some use to you, and I hope to see you again at a guild show.